Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vitor,
I'm Ben Rhodes.
and we are in a studio together.
I've never been this excited to come to a workspace.
They said this day would never come,
Yeah.
Ben. We both were laughing very hard a minute ago when you called me to be like, what is the office address
I
again?
forgot where this was. I drove 30 minutes from my house in Venice, got into the neighborhood, and I was like, I don't even remember the name of the street. It's been a year and a half.
The muscle memory's gone.
It's gone. It was gone. And it wasn't even in my maps, right? Because I haven't gone there in so long. So
well, we're reverse Bo Burnhaming.
Yes.
We're moving outside. This feels good.
We're moving outside, and it does. It feels very good to be in any kind of workspace other than the room I've been sitting in forever.
Yeah, I mean, since I've last seen you, you've had to try to teach school. I'm sure that was maybe harder than writing another bestseller.
I mean, if I think about, I taught a class, I wrote a book, I recorded a podcast, Missing America, in my closet, right? So that I had the good audio quality. And I was angry coming in the studio thinking like how easy it would have been to record that podcast if I could have just sat in a professional studio instead of being in a closet with like a kit and somebody in my ear.
I forgot you taught a college class. I just meant like trying to teach elementary school to two little kids.
Oh, forget that. Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing that happened in the entire pandemic, and I think, this is universal with parents, is like a 4 and a 6-year-old on Zoom school. I mean, the 4-year-old was not wanting to. Chloe was like, this is not school.
Just not having it.
And she was right.
She's a smart kid. Yeah. She's like, where are my friends? Where are the fun teachers? You guys are boring me.
Yeah, I don't need you over my shoulder helping me with this art project.
No.
Thank you very much.
Go away.
Go away, Dad.
Go read about authoritarians or whatever you do.
Go work on your authoritarianism book, Dad. I'm going to paint a picture.
Well, much like Bo Burnham, we're going to make you guys some sweet, sweet content today. We have a ton to cover. There is the worst civil unrest in South Africa since apartheid ended. New details about the shady for-profit spying industry and how it's being used to target journalists, activists, others. Ben, I know you have some experience with these creeps. Some climate change news, updates out of Haiti and Cuba. The space race, big update there this morning, if you give a shit. And a pretty gross Australian mystery, and then some fun Olympic updates. So let's start in South Africa because, people in eastern South Africa are slowly recovering from days of violence and looting that left hundreds dead, more than 2,500 arrests, and hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. So this violence started on July 8th after former South African President Jacob Zuma was arrested and sentenced to 15 months in prison for refusing to testify before a commission investigating government corruption. But it quickly ballooned into widespread ransacking of malls, other retail stores, and then there was a bunch of arson and just destruction of warehouses and factories. And it's been described, the violence, as the worst since South Africa became a democracy in 1994. And it only ended after current South African President Cyril Ramaphosa deployed 25,000 South African troops to restore order. South Africa's economy has been just devastated by the coronavirus. Unemployment is over 33%. The country is in the midst of its third COVID lockdown, but I believe unemployment benefits have run out, so people are really desperate. It could take years to rebuild these businesses, the infrastructure. There's concern that all these people gathering together could lead to another spike in COVID cases. So just devastating news here for the people of South Africa who are, I didn't realize this, Ben. According to, I think it's the World Bank, one of these international bodies, South Africa has the worst economic inequality of any country in the world, period.
Yeah.
And it's gotten worse since apartheid.
Yeah, which has some of its roots in apartheid and then in the post-apartheid corruption. And to me, this is a story that speaks to kind of the nexus of corruption with other societal problems because Zuma was, Jacob Zuma was the president before Ramaphosa, just phenomenally corrupt. I mean, billions and billions, basically treated his position as the head of the ANC and president as a way to enrich himself. I think there's a lot of suspicion that after he was sentenced, his people kind of ginned up some people to get out and protest. And then that clearly blended in with a lot of grievances that are already out there over the scale of inequality. COVID has been particularly difficult. They've had, they had the beta variant there. They've had a hard time with that. But this kind of combination of a sense that government is not only not solving the problem, but has been part of the problem, right? And Ramaphosa's tried to kind of turn the page a bit, and just the very fact of the prosecution going forward of Zuma is a sign of introducing some accountability to the system. But unless they kind of get their arms around this massive corruption in society, their capacity to deal with things like inequality and and having a fairer economy is going to be much harder. So I think it also speaks to one other thing, Tommy, which is COVID. Our economy is booming here, and feels great, and the worst concern is inflation. In South Africa type countries, or you see in Indonesia, for instance, now a big wave. Like we're not out of the woods, and there's going to be potential political instability and huge ripple effects from COVID all over the developing world, including in fairly developed societies like South Africa, for instance. This is going to be with us for a while.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned this. Ramaphosa called the unrest a coordinated effort to sabotage the economy and essentially stage a coup. To your broader point about Zuma and the ANC, I mean, the ANC, his political party, has been in power since 1994. There's basically no real opposition. Corruption's gotten worse. Inequality has gotten worse. And it's just, it's hard to tell exactly where the tipping point was from sort of like, maybe sort of political allies staging something to create unrest to just this broader thing that encompassed, basically it was 2 of the 9 provinces in South Africa were basically just, destroyed. I mean, and they account for nearly 50% of GDP.
Yeah.
So it's a really big deal.
Yeah. And the ANC issue more broadly, everybody remembers the heroic history of the ANC and Nelson Mandela's leadership, and Mandela himself stepping down instead of trying to stay in power forever, like a lot of people around the world do. But it's gotten kind of progressively worse up through Zuma, where, look, when you have a one-party system, that opens up a lot of doors for potential corruption. And guys like Zuma, kind of traded on the legitimacy of their history as part of that struggle, tragically, to just kind of enrich themselves.
Yeah.
And hopefully Ramaphosa, he seems to be a more on the level character, but there's just a competitive political environment would be healthy there, so that there isn't this kind of sense of impunity.
Yeah. Ben, I was trying to do a bunch of reading on this. So I was reading like from Jacobin on the left, and then I clicked on a Fox News story. It was Laura Ingraham and talking to Lara Logan, who's a correspondent who I believe is South African. Lara Logan tried to blame what was happening in South Africa on critical race theory, woke ideology, and tech companies. And then she goes, and Obama's former ambassador to South Africa, Patrick Gaspard, now works for George Soros. It was like the Fox fever dream. Yeah, they just saw like video of violence or unrest, and they decided like, well, let's take this, make it about the United States, and try to scare old white people once again. That is disgusting.
That's really dark.
Super dark.
That's your first reaction, like, because none of that is connected to what's happening.
Critical race theory. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, it just shows images of black and brown people in the streets. It doesn't matter where they are, whether they're in the United States or anywhere in the world. Let's just play those and play the greatest hits, right? Like we'll go after George Soros. We'll go after Obama somehow, Cap where Patrick Gaspard now works. Like it's totally insane.
Yeah, the DLC. Let's throw some more in there.
Yeah,
let's go. What do we got?
Yeah.
Ugh, disgusting. Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that story. But let's talk about spying for profit. So there were a bunch of blockbuster reports this week. There's an Israeli company called the NSO Group that has been leasing military-grade surveillance technology to governments, and they've been using it to hack phones belonging to journalists, human rights activists, and even to women who are close to Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was murdered by the Saudi government. This report, it was like 17 news outlets and like a French nonprofit called Forbidden Stories who got all this information and put it out. And it's worth reading these reports in full because the Post and others are just like cranking out reams and reams of stories. But a couple of things I took away. One, the software is being used against private citizens, the claim by the company that it's like against terrorists and criminals.
Bullshit.
Nonsense.
Total bullshit.
Two, those of us who have iPhones, you ain't safe. They're generally considered more secure, but this software could gain access to everything on an iPhone: emails, calls, passwords, location, data, pictures.
Great.
Bad news. Bad news. Three, you victims, you like, sometimes when people are victims of a phishing attack, you think, oh, you idiot, how do you click on that, right? In this case, you don't have to click on a link. They can just text you something. You might never know about it. You can be infected, not do anything. So it's like everyone could be a victim. Yeah. So again, lots to the story. But here's some things that really bug me, Ben. So the NSO Group was founded by former Israeli intelligence goons, right? Yeah. They worked for their version of the NSA, doing signals intelligence. The Israeli government reportedly signs off on all their licenses. So when Hungary gets a license, the Israeli government signs off on this. The U.S. subsidizes the entire enterprise, right? Because we give $3 billion a year in military aid to Israel.
Sure do.
And help prop up the Israeli defense industry, usually for good, like the Iron Dome missile defense system, good purchase. This, very bad purchase. And so here's my problem. Like, the net effect here is that tyrants like Viktor Orban, the authoritarian leader of Hungary, who you've written about a lot, can spy on journalists. The Indian government can spy on activists, maybe like Rana Ayub.
Yeah.
I don't know that to be the case. That's not in our interests, right? And so, like, the concerns about this software, this company aren't new. I'm sure listeners are probably listening to this and thinking, hey, you guys worked for like the U.S. government. The U.S. government spies on more people than anyone else. You're full of shit. You're hypocrites. You know what? Fine. But like a bunch of companies selling spyware for profit is a very slippery slope to me. And I'm just wondering, what did you make of these reports? And do you think that we're going to pressure the Israeli government to say, shut this down?
A couple thoughts on this, and one is to play back the tape, right? And I talk about this a lot in After the Fall. I learned that I was spied on by Black Cube. So Black Cube is a bunch of former Mossad guys, and they also had spied on Harvey Weinstein's accusers, right? If Mossad is kind of the CIA and NSO is the NSA, it's like these guys just leave and set up private shop.
Yeah.
And what was interesting in working on my book, when I went to Hungary, two of the people I met with in Hungary had a connection to being spied on by Black Cube. Sándor Lederer, one of the main characters in Hungary, his cousin had been spied on by Black Cube and worked for Marta Pardavi, another person whose organization was spied on by Black Cube. And then I talked to Navalny, and he'd been spied on by Black Cube. And there was like this international community of people. If you're an NGO activist or a former official like me or an anti-corruption person or what have you, like suddenly, we should just expect that an autocrat or an oligarch is paying like a bunch of former Mossad guys to spy on you or intimidate you or surveil you. And it led me to kind of investigate more this question of this private intelligence industry where any autocrat or any oligarch associated with an autocrat can go kind of one-stop shopping for a disinformation campaign, to dig up dirt on someone, to surveil someone, try to entrap somebody. The person in Hungary who had actually been caught in this Black Cube scheme where they went to him and they got him, and I described this in the book, they got him on tape saying that he was lobbying the European Union to be tougher on Orban's government, which of course he was. He's an NGO activist. Mm-hmm. But this appears in the Jerusalem Post of all places. That's where it's leaked right before the Hungarian election as proof of like a conspiracy by Hungarian NGOs to overthrow Orban, right? Mm-hmm. So that leads me to my second point, which is, again, like people may add us, but like there's an Israeli nexus to this, and it's a part of a broader ecosystem that is not limited to Israel, but it includes the American right and Trump associates who are tied in with these people. And
remember when we were on that list of like enemies from the
list of enemies
NSC,
or whatever.
NSC?
Yeah, whatever the fuck is Eric Prince doing in his private intel work? And then you've got Viktor Orban, who's clearly in this world. Bibi Netanyahu was clearly in this world. The Saudis and the Emiratis clearly in this world. There's this kind of alliance of these autocrats that look at journalists and certain former officials like us, or look at activists, and we're nowhere near the danger that these other people are. But like it's totally unsettling, and there's a part of me that thinks that they don't even mind when these stories come out. Because I think part of it is it's like intimidation. It's like, oh, what are they going to be in my phone? I better not say certain things on my phone, Or maybe it's not worth, being a journalist who investigates corruption because I don't want to be targeted by this, right? So to me, it's part of this kind of really kind of transnational industry of and this is where it's different than the U.S. government, conducting basically state espionage, right? Like this is like a transnational network of autocrats and oligarchs and service industries that is meant to intimidate people.
It also makes me wonder, I mean, if you have the Mossad and then this Unit 8200 that does the Ziegler's intelligence for Israel, if they can't get government approval to spy on someone or something, maybe you call up your old buddy in private industry and sort of outsource it to them. Like put a couple layers between you. I mean, the whole thing is disconcerting and ripe for abuse.
I could not agree with you more. Like clearly what happens is, you might not want it to get out that the Israeli government or the Saudi government or the Hungarian government was spying on a journalist or an activist. So you just create this layer where when it comes out, everybody denies that they knew anything about it. Mm-hmm. If you're telling me for a second that the Netanyahu government in Israel had no idea that a bunch of former Mossad agents and former Israeli NSA types were doing all this stuff, and I mean, that's insane that they like. Of course,
Yeah.
somebody knew in the Israeli government. Like, this is a pretty small community of people. They work on this stuff, and so look, it's another thing of where we have to ask these hard questions. And again, something else we took a lot of shit for, but like one of the darker underbellies of the Abraham Accords, right? And is it good that the Emiratis and other governments have recognized Israel? Yes, but part of what has undergirded this relationship is the collaboration in space like this, which is not great.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, we just don't want to see like a private spyware industry crop up in every country, and all of a sudden everyone's selling this stuff to the highest bidder, and God help us all. Speaking of hacks, on Monday in the U.S.,
good transition.
The European Union, NATO, a bunch of other close allies of the U.S. Accused the Chinese government of being behind a series of recent cyber attacks, including this March 2021 hack into Microsoft's email servers. I think we talked about it at the time. DOJ also charged 4 Chinese nationals with trying to steal intellectual property, including Ebola vaccine research and driverless vehicle technology. So we're used to that kind of stuff, like the Chinese government stealing IP. But apparently the Chinese were working with criminals for hire, and they were also conducting ransomware, and that surprised government officials talking on background and some of the reporting on this. So it was interesting to me to see that there was this big multilateral announcement. It included NATO. I think that might have been new. They didn't announce any sanctions, but it does seem like the goal, according to people in these stories, the goal is to get the Chinese and the Russians to agree to some guardrails for cyber attacks, and maybe these enforcements periodically are trying to help get us there. I don't know. What'd you make of this?
I mean, first of all, it does show how far things have moved in a decade, because when there were some of these types of cyber attacks in the Obama years, we were always told, like, you're not allowed to talk. I think you probably dealt with this, right?
Yeah.
It was treated like a law enforcement activity, right? So it was only the FBI or DOJ that was allowed to say someone was responsible for a hack, and it wasn't until that North Korea Sony hack that began to change. I'm glad that we're not. I thought that was stupid at the time. It's like everybody knows, why can't we say the Russians are doing this? And they would say because there's an ongoing law enforcement case and we might bring charges and you don't want to prejudice that. But the reality is this is of such a...
Sure, those charges are going to land. Those 4 Chinese nationals are going to fly over. And
we got them. Preet's going to be ringing them up in front of the SDNY. To no fault of the Biden people, because I give them a huge credit for prioritizing this. We don't quite know what to do about this yet.
No.
The Russians and Chinese clearly have no respect for any norm or guardrail when it comes to ransomware. This is far beyond espionage, right? Because again, people could rightly say, well, they're just like hacking into systems trying to learn stuff about what's happening in America. How is that different than what America does in other places? This is going well beyond that. It's not just theft of intellectual property. It's ransomware. It's criminality. So I think it's smart to try to multilateralize this, bring a lot of public attention to it, and then try to drive that into some kind of negotiation.
Yeah. Give them the Ebola research vaccine. Let everybody work on that.
Take that one. Driverless cars, though, I don't know if I want a driverless car.
Yeah, I can't tell if they're working or not. Let's talk climate change, because there's a bunch of news in this last week. So first thing, this is a little dark. A new study found that part of the Amazon rainforest is now emitting more carbon dioxide than it absorbs. This is very bad, since historically the Amazon has absorbed and captured CO2 and helped take it out of the atmosphere, which slows down climate change. But deforestation, which dramatically increased under President Bolsonaro, and then just general warming of the planet has led to a tipping point where you could see a functional destruction of the Amazon, where it turns into grass savanna, basically. So that's real depressing. 2, climate change is seen as a factor that led to extreme rain and flooding in parts of Germany and Belgium that killed hundreds of people, left hundreds more missing, and will cost billions to clean up and repair. It could also create some political fallout in Germany, because the conservative candidate who is looking to replace Angela Merkel when she steps down at the end of this year was caught on camera at an event honoring the victims. He was joking with some colleagues. So there's a question of whether this will help the Green Party. 3 cheers for that if it does. And then finally, Ben, last week, China opened a national carbon emissions market, or a cap and trade program. So this would limit the amount of carbon dioxide that companies can release, power companies specifically in China. It's not their entire industry, but it would encourage them to be more energy efficient, because if you are a coal-powered plant and you can reduce your carbon output, you can then sell the unused pollution allowances. Companies that go over the limit will have to pay, right? So it creates this market to be a little cleaner. Ben, these 3 stories together, like the Amazon news is horrible, the floods are awful. What do you think about the creation of this long-promised emissions market from China? I know this was promised to Obama, I believe, in 2015 by Xi Jinping.
Yeah, I think it's a positive step, and I think you see some, the European Union's pressing for a border adjustment tax too, which essentially would be a tax on other countries that are not taking sufficient steps on climate on their goods. So you're seeing these new public policy responses. On China in particular, they've actually shown increasing and positive ambition in terms of what they're doing at home, and this is the latest step in that regard. The next frontier with China, though, is their Belt Road Initiative, right, where they're building, $1 trillion worth of infrastructure along this vast territory.
Right.
They're not applying the same standards there.
The cement.
So they're building they're using coal on the Belt Road. So it's good. The next step, though, is China has to, and the U.S., by the way, in our own development efforts around the world, everybody needs to the highest bar that they're meeting domestically needs to be internationalized. Brazil's another piece of this picture, which is that, one of the things I was struck by late in the Obama administration getting to Paris, and I mentioned this before, is how climate change enters into a bilateral relationship. It's not just at the multilateral, nerdy climate negotiations that you do business. The biggest issue in the U.S.-Brazil relationship going forward should be the protection of the Amazon.
Yeah.
That bilaterally, when we sit down to talk to Brazil, it shouldn't just be about, commerce and hemispheric issues. This is it, right? And it's a good example of how every country has some unique piece of this climate puzzle that we have to solve. And this one, clearly, they're moving under Bolsonaro in a hugely wrong direction, literally to the point where the entire planet has a stake in Bolsonaro losing next year.
Yeah. Well, last we heard of him, he was at the hospital because he had been hiccuping for days and days and days.
Yeah, 2 weeks of hiccups.
Yeah, I wanted to make fun of him, and then I learned it was related to when he was stabbed in 2018, I believe. So that made it less funny to me. But yeah, I don't know. We need that guy to lose.
Yeah, there's enough other reasons for that guy to lose other than the hiccups.
Yeah, he's wildly corrupt. The latest allegation is that he cut some sweetheart deal to get, I believe, the Indian vaccine for COVID that was at some inflated price, and he turned down Pfizer or something. He's just the worst leader possible for that country.
Can you imagine having so little regard for your country and its future because the Amazon is first and foremost a climate resource, but it's also just part of Brazil's identity.
Mm-hmm.
He just doesn't give a
people,
shit. Yeah, it's just I want to own the Brazilian libs by cutting down the Amazon. Well, congratulations.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Some Haiti updates. So on Monday, Haiti announced a new prime minister who they hope will fill the leadership vacuum left by the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. Just before Moïse's assassination, he announced that a man named Ariel Henry will become the next prime minister. But the prime minister at the time, Claude Joseph, decided to hang on to power after the assassination happened. So for a while, we had two people claiming to be the prime minister of Haiti. Not good.
Tough gig.
Yeah, tough gig.
Yeah.
Joseph announced that he will step down after reportedly lots of pressure from the U.S. and other foreign countries. His consolation prize is becoming foreign minister, so all the gangs kind of sticking together here. U.S. officials say they're pushing for a unity government followed by elections. So, Ben, I have no idea what to make of this. I don't know the players. I'm not in Haiti, obviously. But clearly it was dangerous and untenable to have two people claiming to control the country, right? You don't want it to devolve. But the international community barging in and forcing a solution like this and saying this guy's in charge now sounds like exactly the opposite of what Woodlore Marincourt, who I talked to last week, a Haitian journalist, suggested was needed, right? Which is just listen to the Haitian people, listen to civil society. And it comes not long after both Trump and the Biden White House publicly backed President Moïse, who was disputing the length of his term, basically. He said he should be able to hang on for one more year because he took power late, long story short. What did you make of this recent news about sort of U.S.-backed machinations and that broader criticism that the U.S. is once again tolerating authoritarian rulers in hope of creating stability?
Yeah, I thought, the New York Times did a long story on this over the weekend about how both Trump and Biden had backed Moïse despite kind of constant warnings that this guy's autocratic, this guy's undermining the rule of law. And it's a pretty disappointing story. And it had this other piece that connects to what we're talking about in terms of listening to Haitians. The kind of reflexive talking point is just we'll have an election,
right.
And
punt it down the road.
That sounds good,
yes.
Right? It sounds great. We'll have an election and that'll sort this out and then there'll be a legitimate government. But the problem is, when you rush these elections, these Haitian elections, they're a mess. There's constant charges of fraud. There's violence in certain areas and intimidation. The elections kind of get rushed and then they're disputed. And look, obviously you want to get to an election, but to what we're talking about last, we should just keep repeating this. let's listen to the Haitian NGOs and civil society who want democracy in Haiti to work, right? About
have since 1804.
Yes, like let's
Yeah.
instead of a bunch of foreigners saying, okay, hold an election and then we can all say this is taken care of, even though nothing is fixed. Like let's listen to these people and develop a process that is driven by them. That is the roadmap to what the government is and what the election process is, and how can we better put up guardrails against corrupt results and the rest of it. I just there's this kind of cookie cutter approach where you say, well, we're back that guy because he happens to be there, and then we'll hold the election. And clearly in Haiti, that has not worked.
Yeah, I mean, clearly a lot of these leaders have just not served the place well for a while. And I guess they told the president of the Senate who was going to run to stand down, and he was asked why. And he said, because the U.S. diplomats basically called and told me not to. So
yeah.
We're very much thumbing the scale. Speaking of thumbing the scale, let's go to Cuba, because last week we talked about these truly unprecedented anti-government protests. So a couple updates since then. First, it was interesting that the Cuban government made some small concessions to the protesters by announcing that Cubans can temporarily travel abroad and bring back food, medicine, and other essential items without having to pay customs. Did you think that was a significant concession?
I did. The other thing that they did, which they almost never do, is they admitted error. They said that they had made some mistakes. It did suggest to me a government that is nervous about what's happening. I think it also suggests like Diaz-Canel, who's the president now, is not Fidel or Raul Castro. Like he doesn't have the same
that's a common
aura,
theme.
right? And so he's kind of grasping for ways to let some air out of this balloon. And so to me, again, broken record here. What we should be trying to do is get as much into Cuba as possible in terms of both the humanitarian assistance, but like greater connectivity to the world. I've seen some people, saying we should like put the internet up in the sky or something. We negotiated internet access, and that was beginning to make headway. You can block the internet. The Cubans have Chinese and Russian friends who can show them how to block the internet. Ultimately, the best and most efficient way to get internet access, which we did and worked, was like just a negotiated process of getting that in there. It feels like their vulnerability. It's funny, you could look at that, and most people, I guess, in American politics would look at what the Cubans did in terms of allowing for some people to travel and said, oh, that means we should squeeze them more,
Right.
I'd come to the opposite conclusion. Says, no, that means that these guys might allow in more connectivity to the outside world. That's what we should be trying to do. I'm not optimistic that that's what we'll try to do given the politics of Cuba. But to me, it would be a huge missed opportunity if these guys are somewhat desperate and looking to open back up in some ways, despite the last few years of Trump sanctions. If we just kind of issue our statements from Washington, keep everything in place, it's not going to change down there. It's just going to stay the pressure cooker that it is.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of pressure cookers, so I saw that Cubans are dealing with 11% contraction in GDP in 2020, an estimated 500% inflation rate. The other notable things were the government, I guess, has been organizing counter-protests to bring out everybody in support of the revolution. And then President Biden ordered the State Department to review U.S. remittance policy and then consider adding staff to the U.S. embassy. So those are some things we talked about last week.
Those are good steps. And remittances go directly to Cubans, helps them, deepens connections to the United States. Diplomats we want there. If it did change, right? Like, and this is something people need to keep in mind, right? They wouldn't just stand up and hold multi-party elections and declare freedom. It would change probably for the worse if the government kind of collapses to some extent, and then there's like desperation and the rest of it. That's why you want a diplomatic presence. That's why you want to be there. You want to be engaged to try to understand what's happening and see what we can do to nudge things in a better direction.
One sort of Cuba adjacent story. So, the Trump administration emptied out the embassy because of this mysterious illness, or reports of a mysterious illness that was afflicting staff there. It was called the Havana syndrome for short. Symptoms include debilitating headaches, nausea, vertigo, vision problems, and in some cases, brain damage that resembles a concussion. We've talked about this a bunch. This week, the New Yorker, a guy named Adam Entis, reported that since Biden took office, about 24 U.S. government officials serving in Vienna, Austria, have reported symptoms similar to the Havana syndrome. So the working hypothesis still seems to be that Russian intelligence goons are aiming microwave radiation devices at these victims, probably trying to steal their data. Although that doesn't totally make sense to me. If you're like some intel guy with your iPhone, like what's the value of that data? It's not classified. So anyway, but then it's hurting people inadvertently. That's one of the theories. We don't know for sure. It does seem clear, Ben, that like this wasn't some Cuban-led op, since like I don't think they're running big teams in Vienna.
You can be 100% sure that the Cubans were not attacking U.S. diplomats in Vienna, which again, just like the theory from the beginning that I had, that a lot of people had, is that the Russians were behind this. They're the only ones who are that aggressive, and that maybe in a place like Cuba they had some help from some Cubans on the inside. Who knows who they run? You know, they're pretty deep in places like Vienna too. But like this is a problem of enormous scale, because this is happening around the world. Any U.S. diplomat is probably feeling a little unsafe right now. And again, this is not a criticism, because the Biden people just, have only been there for a few months, probably trying to get their arms around this. But this is another one where they need to kind of explain what's happened. I think some greater transparency is needed on this, because this is that big of an issue. And then they need to figure out how to communicate that they can deal with this, right? And again, I say that with a lot of that's not easy, but this keeps popping up, and I'm glad that Adeimantus and is still on this, because like a lot of people kind of moved on from the story, but like it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I mean the good thing is, according to this report, Bill Burns, the new CIA director, is like seized with the problem. He's really talking to victims, paying close personal attention.
And Park is a diplomat, right? So he knows, he's a CIA director who was a lifelong diplomat, so he knows what it must feel like to be in posted at some embassy and not know whether your headache is because you got hit with a weapon, or whether you just have a headache.
Yeah, you're just hungover.
Yeah, well
just look, both could be true.
Yeah, but I was in Havana and in 2017, and I learned about these attacks from a friend who worked at the embassy.
Oh, really?
We had like a drink, and he kind of quietly told me about this, and I was like, what? And a couple days later, I got incredibly sick.
Oh no.
I had like a massive headache, and I was, let's just say I was swelling up, all that.
Sure.
And it was like, I was like, oh, I have food poisoning, like that, which happens in Cuba, right? Like, you're eating a bunch of different stuff. And I was just incredibly sick for like longer than you normally would be, like 2 days instead of one, basically. And then I was fine. And I probably, 95%, I ate something bad, or, the Havana Club rum did something weird to my system or whatever. But like, it's in your head.
Yeah, that anxiety ain't going
There's
anywhere.
This anxiety in my head of like, did somebody hit me here?
No.
Like, what's going on here?
That anxiety is your friend.
I guarantee you that's in the heads of a lot of people serving overseas.
Totally, or people thinking about serving overseas.
Yeah,
it's terrible. Let's do a little space news. This morning, Amazon founder Jeff Bezos and his Blue Origin rocket company successfully launched the richest man in the world and 3 other people 65 miles above the Earth and briefly into space. On a previous pod, we talked about how this was a space race between Bezos, Elon Musk, and Richard Branson. It's an intergalactic dick measuring contest. And so I would be
We were ahead of the curve. We were way ahead of the curve.
Speaking of the curve, Ben, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Bezos' rocket was by far the most phallic looking of the 3. I mean,
I have to say, I opened up Twitter this morning,
the jokes were flying,
and I was like, we were about 2 weeks ahead of the zeitgeist on this one, because
wow.
Now, so I was thinking of like, what is the additional angle? Because the phallus we've referenced, and people should make fun of that because it does say something. The picture, right? So like when I was a kid and I grew up, there were always those iconic pictures of like the flight crews, like before they went up in a space mission.
So like walking slowly.
The old cool ones were like the Apollo missions, but even like the space shuttle, they'd always take that picture of the astronauts with their helmets,
Affleck.
right? Yeah. And then it's like Affleck, right? Now Bezos put out this picture. Did you see this of the 4 of them in the blue suits
with the hat?
Yeah, and they're all holding the helmets, and there's randomly like it's him and his brother, and there's like an old woman who I don't even know who she is.
She's an interesting story. She qualified to be an astronaut and was not allowed because of sexism and gender rules.
So I'm glad she went to space.
She's like 80 years old, so that's like a cool story.
Okay.
And then there's some young kid who's I think maybe won it in the auction. He's some Dutch kid.
Okay, so here's the thing. Like, we'll put aside this woman who I'm glad she went to space, but like those people that used to be in those pictures, like had earned it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they trained to be astronauts for like decades, like their whole lives, or they were like fighter pilots in the Navy or something. Like these guys just like want the thrill ride. It's like that picture that maybe they had the poster on the wall when they were a kid of like the people going up in the shuttle or something. I was like, come on, man. Like,
Yeah, it's like Jared buying his way into Harvard.
yeah,
It's not
exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, you didn't earn this trip to space like all these astronauts that you're posing like.
Say what you want about Elon Musk, but he's like, his primary job is engineering. He's
Yeah.
designing things. Like,
Yeah.
that's what he does all day. He's not just financing it by selling some shares of Amazon. Like,
Yeah.
whatever. I think it's kind of cool. Here's a quote from Mr. Bezos, Ben. "The solar system can easily support 1 trillion humans," Bezos said. "If we had 1 trillion humans, we could have 1,000 Einsteins and 1,000 Mozarts and unlimited, for all practical purposes, resources and solar power." To which I say, Jeff, the edibles have gotten a lot stronger.
Well, and if you have 1 trillion humans, how many Prime customers is that?
So-
Like that's what like when he takes the edible and he thinks about the 1 trillion humans and the colonies on Mars and stuff, he's thinking about Amazon Prime, like
That's 100 million Kindles.
hoverboards and stuff coming down, like dropping off like your paper towels at the fucking colony. You know?
Intergalactic drones
Yeah,
just
yeah.
flipping you some TP.
Yeah.
Again, space exploration is cool. I guess I'm happy about this. I'd love to see these billionaires think about spending money on climate change so that we could hang on to this planet for a while, because these rockets are just like belching out like 60 airplanes worth of CO2 every time they launch. So if this becomes like a tourism thing, it's gonna be a problem.
Well, this is the other question I generally, because like you're right, Elon Musk, who we can find a lot to criticize him for, but like
Mostly his tweets.
He's been, mostly his tweets. He's been consistent and diligent in like building something that's like a kind of model, a business, public-private partnership, whatever. But like on these flights, like what clearance do you have to get? Like if Jeff Bezos wants to go to space, like is that just like another air traffic control thing? Like, I mean, how do you do that? Like, who do you call? Do you have to call NASA and be like, hey, can I do you need a permit to go to space? Like,
I bet you do.
yeah. I mean,
Interesting.
I like this. I'd like to see, if you're Jeff Bezos, I guess you just do what you want. But
I'm going to take an edible and Google that for
Yeah.
an hour tonight.
Yeah.
All right, Ben. So everybody loves
I still think people should have, like the army en masse should have taken the edibles and marched in Area 51.
Yeah, that
and
was a miss.
once again, we were ahead of the curve.
Will Nas
because
X
it was
supposed to
like
do it.
it was like a year ahead of the alien report, 2 years, and we were calling for this to happen.
Pre-COVID.
And then they canceled the march. Remember? And it was
Yeah.
like,
Well, I think they're all going to die in Death Valley.
that's fair. Because I was going to root it on from here. I wasn't actually going to go.
So Area 51, great mystery. Everybody loves a good mystery, right? Knives Out, Get Out, Memento, Scream, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Here's a new entry from our friends in Australia. Did Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison shit himself in a McDonald's in 1997? Apparently everyone in Australia wants to know. So Ben, the weirdest part of this story, people are wondering, what is Tommy talking about? I guess
No, this is like a huge deal.
Morrison
Huge
brought
deal.
this up in a radio interview. So I guess the rumor went viral in 2019.
He could have done this on Pod Save the World.
Any
too.
other time. You could have done this anytime. So I guess in 2019, this went so viral that a street artist put up a commemorative plaque at the McDonald's in question. And you can find like Kennedy assassination, Zapruder film, like breakdowns of what his exit would be going from like the rugby match to home. So it's absolutely hilarious. The most, advanced conspiracy theorists wonder if he brought this up in the interview to distract from their terrible record on COVID. I don't know. Like, what do we make of this? Couldn't bad McDonald's be why those guys got lost naked in the woods a few weeks ago?
So I have a couple thoughts on this, and I was going to start with the naked people in the woods, and just allude to the fact that like we keep coming back to Australia through these pretty interesting angles. But I have to say, this is kind of what I love about Australians. When I started reading about this, like how big this thing was,
Huge.
like it's set, like if you know Australians and like their sense of humor, like the endless jokes that there must be about this episode is just kind of awesome, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
in the same way that there was something weirdly awesome about like the naked dudes who were probably so high that they ran into the woods.
By the way, though, a lot of listeners were talking shit to us, being very credulous that we thought that these guys were really scared by a deer. Neither of us ruled out that they were engaging in maybe other activities, mushrooms, perhaps other. I just didn't understand how you could run so far into the woods that you got lost, or the deer component.
The deer component.
It's a bad lie.
Why, that's a bad cover story if it's cover story. So kudos to the Australian people for keeping this conspiracy theory or thing alive about Scott Morrison, who's kind of a pretty creepy guy anyway. But then the other thing is clearly, and I'm going to go kind of on the record here, he clearly shit himself. I mean, you protest too much. Like I saw everybody says this and I see why people think it's a good yarn, but it's wrong. And it felt like a defensiveness Like if you had been accused of shitting yourself in a McDonald's like 15 years or 20 years ago, whatever, you'd probably be like, oh, come on, that's crazy. I'm sick of hearing that. He seemed to like really engage, you know?
Yeah, it reminds me of a very famous viral tweet that I think said something like, "My not engaging in human trafficking T-shirt is raising more questions than it answered."
Yeah.
Bringing up the story of you maybe sharding in a McDonald's in
Yeah.
1997.
And look, man, I mean, I haven't done that, but like, who knows what was going on in 97? It happens.
Famously, shit happened.
I mean, McDonald's bathroom is usually not the nicest place. Like,
yeah, he was probably slamming some pints at the rugby match.
Yeah, you just getting like a couple of Big Macs after having a little too much to drink. Like, it's all right, man.
I love Australia. I want to go back.
I love Australia.
I want to go to Sydney. Remember, we went to Australia. We went to Canberra and Darwin, and those were not where you go as a tourist.
I went to Canberra and Darwin, and then I went back to Brisbane. But then I got to go to Sydney after government, and it's everything that people tell you it is. It's just awesome. It's just it's like
can't go right now. I don't think.
None. They're not really vaccinated over there.
Yeah, well, that's why Scott Morrison.
I mean, they've had low cases because they did effective lockdowns and stuff, and they're pretty cut off. But like, their vaccine rates are like really, really low.
Yeah, not good. Yeah. I don't think they prioritized it. Little Olympic update. So the games start very soon. Unfortunately, the big news so far is a lot of positive COVID test results that might prevent athletes from competing. So American tennis star Coco Gauff tested positive. She's so good.
I love her.
She's really cool. I guess a young woman, minor, an alternate on the gymnastics team tested positive. A few South African soccer players tested positive. Then you have all these athletes flying on commercial flights, and a bunch of them have been on planes where they found out someone on their flight had COVID. So now they're stuck in like maybe quarantine limbo. And if they have to fully quarantine, they can't compete. So these poor people are just screwed. It's like, I don't know that you could do a better job designing an international super spreader event than like slap a bunch of athletes from hundreds of countries on a plane to one place commercially.
Yeah, this doesn't feel like it's going well. No. And this question of whether people who've been exposed after quarantine, I don't know if like Jason Concepcion can help us. Does anybody know whether Chris Paul had COVID?
Good question.
Because it wasn't 14 days and then he was playing, and I'm glad he was playing. It's great to watch Chris Paul, but like I only raise that because it feels like people are kind of making ad hoc calls here. You know what I mean? Like, and maybe they aren't. I mean, and I'm not even talking about the NBA, I'm talking about the Olympics, like, because the NBA at least has these COVID protocols that they're, now the Olympics has something like that, but I feel like we're going to face a lot of pressure where the number of athletes exposed is going to kind of complicate the integrity of the competition, or there are going to be people who flew all the way there who might not be able to compete, or like the richer countries whose athletes don't have to like change planes 900 times.
Right, or were vaccinated earlier.
Or vaccinated earlier, had this kind of weird advantage. There's just going to be a lot of tough calls here, and thus far it feels like it's not great.
Yeah, it's not great. It's dampening my enthusiasm a little bit. I mean,
I'm still enthusiastic. I'm still like 100% behind our athletes, and that no way diminishes their accomplishment.
No.
Let's be very clear. I want to see Simone Biles crush it and all the rest of it. I'm going to watch the wheelchair rugby because now you and I are like,
we're all in.
Totally standing U.S. wheelchair rugby. This is a tough one. You know?
Yeah, I think it's a question of whether some of these breakthrough infections, like you're infected but you're not sick at all, and that might be what Chris Paul had. Mostly I just feel for the Japanese people who are like, we didn't want this. We're in lockdown. Yeah. We're not making any money on this.
We can't go to the games. Japanese world is out there. Like, we have like total solidarity. And how much it must suck to like spend billions of dollars to host these games, and you can't go. And it makes it feel like COVID's kind of coming around. It's just not.
And there's all these weird controversies, like the South Korean president's not going because
there's always a Japan-South Korea thing. Yeah.
He said something. You know what?
Yeah,
I don't have the exact wording, but
so
it was something.
Don't wade into it. Don't wade into it because you're gonna piss off one side of that. Yeah, and it's not gonna be good.
Google what a Japanese embassy official said about the South Korean leadership, and then you'll know why.
I'll Google it myself. Yeah, I wasn't tracking.
It's kind of funny. Yeah. Okay, so 3 athletes for you, Ben. So Brianna Clark. Brianna is a Paralympian competing in track and field. She's from LA, so you got to shout out the hometown girl.
Totally got her back.
Won a gold medal in 2016 in the 400 meters. She has autism, developed when she was 4, but she's an incredible pedigree of athletes that make her just a likely winner this year because her mom, Rosalind, won a silver medal in the 1976 Olympic Games. So when she won her Olympic medal, it was like 40 years later. It's a really awesome story.
This is where Paralympics, I mean, because the thing about the Olympics generally is that like you end up crying, right? Because like you see the story, the kind of brief package that NBC does about the all the things that some athlete had to overcome. And so it's the overcoming to win the medal.
Total sacrifice.
And so nobody embodies that more than these Paralympians who are like overcoming autism, all these things to be these world-class athletes. It's astonishing to me that people accomplish this.
They are astonishing human beings. Ryan Krauser. Ryan is competing in the shot put. This guy, this Haas, is 6'7".
Badass event.
6'7", 275, lives in Oregon. Won gold in Rio in 2016. Okay, listen to this. His cousin qualified for the 2016 games. His dad was an alternate on the 1984 Olympic team. His uncle is also a two-time Olympian. So, again,
were they all shot putters? Can you imagine like the family reunion when you're just a bunch of shot putters? Do you think they just like rip a bunch of beers and then go out to the backyard and so you can like toss a shot?
Throw nieces and nephews. Imagine that dad tossing you in the pool.
The dad tosses in the pool. Yeah, they're better than mine.
Dad, we're reaching the shallow end here. Last one I got. Angelica Delgado. So Angelica is competing in judo. She's from Miami, Florida. Competed the 2016 games and is Team USA's top-ranked hopeful for this year's games. Angelica's dad was on the Cuban national judo team, and he started training her at 9 years old. So that's a tough 9-year-old kid who's like, yeah, let's fight every day in the backyard.
Like, hey.
Did you see the viral New York Post link about the anti-sex beds at the Olympic Village?
No, I tend to not go to the New York Post so much.
So good practice, good hygiene.
Usually they're attacking me. Usually the only time I see it is when
they're really mean to us. So the organizers are making a lot of the beds for athletes out of cardboard, I guess to save space, to recycle them, whatever. The New York Post decided they were anti-sex beds because I guess in their minds you couldn't have sex on them because they might collapse or something.
What is the New York Post? What are they into over there?
I don't know. Yeah, they're also making. They're really, I think, showing a lack of imagination for some of the most athletic people on the planet.
Yeah, they could figure it out. They can
figure this one out. But yeah, so that was fake news.
That feels like fake news to me, and like going too far out of your way to generate an Olympic story, which I support to some extent. But come on.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, you just forget it's like the Murdoch paper. Like everybody, I mean, like yes, it's like a tabloid, so sometimes there's like a funny story, but like it's also like it's like the family paper.
And the thing that sucks about it is, people were like, "Who reads that rag?" You know who reads that rag? Every morning TV producer who lives in New York who gets into some car that's paid for by their network in the morning and has like that paper there in the New York Times and the Journal.
I used to be a Daily News guy growing up.
Really?
But it used to be awesome. It used to be like, there used to be these legends. I don't know if you've heard of like Pete Hamill and all these like hard scrabble, hard drinking, like New York political and sports reporters. Lupica was there. But yeah, it kind of fell on harder times.
Yeah. Harder times.
Maybe cricket should start like a tabloid newspaper.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
I do think there's a space for that on the left that's missing. A lot of stories that need to get laundered through some rags,
the right's been pretty smart about having like a really entertaining tabloid, and we're just going to slide like some insane editorial perspective into it. It's worked very well in the UK and Australia.
Highly effective. Yeah. Okay, well, great to be back in studio with you.
This is awesome. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, it's very nice.
Look at these guys. They're beside themselves with joy.
They look so happy. I mean, if you could see this team here.
All right. Talk to you guys next week.
See ya.